yes. I mean, having observed people working in a more collaborative way in different contexts, I think sometimes the parties aren't necessarily terribly clear on the actual business case for working in that more collaborative way. There may be that it's perceived as something perhaps that they ought to be doing, or ought to be using the language of collaboration in terms of how they communicate and so on. But it seems to be most successful, I think you were indicating, that where it makes good business sense for the client and for the supply chain that they're working with, then it probably does give benefits for all the parties involved.
Yes. Now, I'm going to reflect a little bit on perhaps what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years, and maybe look forward to what might happen going forward as the market deteriorates a little bit.
Well, we're going to come on to that in a minute, you know, towards the end, where what I'm trying to just pin down at the moment is to how deep-rooted, how embedded have these changes that we've been talking about over the last 10 years or so. Now, whether they're attributable to Egan or whether they were attributable to changes that the clients were making or whatever. So there's been something going on. In certain circumstances, that has resulted in considerable benefits for clients and for the supply side of the industry. Yeah? Some other areas, some other clients or some supply chains have been less successful in adopting that approach for various reasons. Perhaps it doesn't suit the nature of the market in which they operate, or they maybe haven't got the culture that is necessary to adopt that more collaborative working and so on. Yeah. So, what I'd like your views on is to, and you've been indicating that there are benefits there. There are some concerns associated with this more collaborative working. But the other issue then is, you know, to what extent has this pervaded the industry as a whole? So what proportion of the industry would you think of clients have an inclination, shall we say, towards collaborative working, and those that are still, even through this period of Egan and so on, are still committed maybe to more competitive approaches to procurement? Right.
Well, I think that introducing the competitive word, I think, is quite a helpful one, because I would suggest in most cases in the past 10 years or so, some element of competition has remained in the way in which clients view the marketplace for consultants and contractors. Now, they might not necessarily go for the least cost solution. They go for the best cost, best value solution, but there's always been that sense of discipline there. I think there's also probably a worthwhile distinction between what you might describe as collaborative delivery and integrated delivery. And one of the most marked trends of the way in which clients have addressed the marketplace in the past 10 years or so has been a much greater use of design and build procurement as a means of risk transfer. And if one goes back to the Design and Build Forum, which I think was doing something probably about 1994-95, they did a survey report of design and build projects, and they were all pretty dull, boring brick boxes. And
we're actually sitting in a design and build.
I'm sure we are.
We rest our case.
But I could now point to a very large selection of what you would describe as iconic buildings, which are delivered down a design and build route. So there you get the situation where clients have encouraged contractors to take on a much wider range of responsibilities. So that's effectively, eventually management of the design team, management of the commercial sides of the project, management of the quality sides of the project. So effectively that clients can get, all of that and more. So I can have a relatively high risk project for a relatively low risk to some extent by integrating the design and delivery team together. Now, how natural that marriage is
and how collaborative those relationships are within that integrated team.
Yes,
will be variable, clearly.
Exactly. So I think there's integration in terms of clearly the responsibilities become clear in terms of where they sit, but then in terms of what questions is the project team being asked once that point of being switched and going on from the client to the contractor. What questions are being asked? What aspects of the client's wider agenda have been locked off effectively by saying, well, at this point, we've actually defined exactly what we're going to deliver. So now our role is to deliver that as in the most resource effective and risk-free way. Because, of course, when a contractor takes on that responsibility there, they've actually that's the point where the difficulties start. So you don't want to spend an awful lot of time worrying about wider aspects of the client's brief. You've got to deliver that project within that budget, or alternatively you'll make a loss. Yes. And even during the good years, we've seen some people make spectacular losses on projects which were clearly more complicated than might have been considered at the start. There are clients who have taken on the collaborative way of working in quite innovative ways. And we did a piece of research probably about 18 months ago about a university client who undertake what best describes two-stage development construct using NEC. So it's almost an exemplar way of working, which was, again, lots of risk transfer, but everybody being absolutely clear what it was they were getting, what the budgets were before everything was signed off. So that was design team, supply chain working together to ensure that the end user, the university client, was getting what they wanted before they committed to expenditure. And that is probably an exemplar of where we could be, albeit that not everybody has necessarily got there.
So you're suggesting that that is still what you described would apply more to the minority of clients on their teams rather than the majority of clients on their teams?
I think that's a fair suggestion. If one was to use the metric of contracts used, I suspect that JCT, design and build, and probably lump sum contracts remain the most popular. NEC growing in use, but a lot of people find it quite difficult to use. And then probably the JCT collaborative contract probably languishing somewhere in terms of people not being really sure to use it. In that, I have failed to mention PPC 2000, which of course has found quite a happy home in the social housing sector. But that hasn't really moved beyond that. And if one thinks that a lot of social housing is relatively simple, moving it into the more complicated areas has proved to be a little bit more difficult.